Hello and welcome to WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Caprice Taylor Mendez and John Padilla make New Haven tick in many ways. One of those many ways is through their work with the Progreso Latino Fund, which raises money and raises consciousness in New Haven. They're here in the WNHH studio to talk about that and about an upcoming forum the fund has planned. Thank you very much for coming in, Caprice and John. Great to see you.
Great
this
to see
part
you,
you
Paul.
say hi.
Great to be here.
Great to see you too, Paul.
And thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. So before we get into the history of Progreso Latino Fund, before we get into the present and the future, fill us in on some of the deets on this upcoming forum where you're going to be featuring a mayor from Puerto Rico and a president of Puerto Rican Community Foundation to talk about what's going on in the island from the continuing recovery more than a year later from Hurricane Maria.
Sure. Again, thanks for the airtime so we can talk about the forum. We decided way back that it would be a good idea to kind of visit, what's going on in Puerto Rico a year after Maria hit, which would have been September 20th. And I've been going back and forth to the island since September of last year. And it has struck me how a lot of the recovery is really going local. And by that, I mean that folks are not waiting around for the government to kind of come in and do whatever it is. A lot of people were waiting for FEMA, obviously, because they needed money and, a lot of the damage was severe. But folks have been taking into their own hands things like clean water projects, microgrids for neighborhoods, economic development and reconstruction projects. And, we all know what happened in Puerto Rico. We know the numbers. We know it was a tragedy. We know it was a level of destruction that was unexpected, at least the severity of the destruction. But what we wanted to find out was, so where do we go from here, right? What's going to happen in Puerto Rico? How are people thinking about the future? We know that there are a lot of folks that are really committed to staying and building a better Puerto Rico. So we thought we'd bring those voices here to New Haven.
So how's that going to happen at this forum? When and where is it? And what are we going to do?
So the forum is November 15th, and it's called Tras la Tormenta, After the Storm, Puerto Rico 1 year after Maria. And the speakers that we're bringing are the mayor of Loíza, Juliana Nazario, and the president and CEO of the Puerto Rico Community Foundation, Nelson Colon. Both of them are kind of at the forefront of these different community-based efforts throughout the island. The foundation is involved in numerous projects, and one that we're connecting to here in New Haven is that there is a island-wide initiative to equip 100 hospitals and health clinics with microgrids, so that in the event of the next power failure, the emergency rooms and the clinics have power. These microgrids cost $30,000 per pack. It's a whole unit, the grid, installation, spare parts.
$30K total.
$30K per grid. So it's a $3 million campaign. Here in New Haven, PLF has committed $15,000 toward one of these packs, and our microgrid is going to go to the health clinic in Naranjito, Puerto Rico.
How do you spell that?
Naranjito is actually like orange, so it's Naranjito.
Mm-hmm.
Naranjito, Puerto Rico. And that's where our grid is going to go, to the health clinic in that community. So at the forum on November 15th, which is going to be at the Lawn Club, we are hoping to crowd fundraise, if you will, the remaining $15,000, or at least most of it. At our forum back in October of last year, we actually did something different. We brought in a comedian, a Puerto Rican comedian.
Elizalde Castro.
Elizalde Castro, who does a one-man show, which is really great. And, even though it was a night of comic relief, his work has a social message to it. So that was good, talking about being bilingual, bicultural, growing up in the States. And at that event, we raised $8,000. And that was spur of the moment. So we're hoping
raising
this
money
time,
and raising costs. You talk about microgrids, and I'm not very knowledgeable about environment or power, but all I've been thinking about for years, when we talk about terrorism, climate change, natural disasters, because what happened to Puerto Rico obviously is happening to other places now too, although we didn't really kick in Puerto Rico the way we do in Florida or Texas. but as a federal government. But why aren't we going to complete microgrids? Because one of the biggest dangers in this country right now, it doesn't get a lot of attention. It was reported in the press the other day that if we ever have a conflict with North Korea, with Russia, who knows who else, maybe Iran, maybe not, but the first two have the capability to just go right into our grid. They can go right into Connecticut. Every day they're fending off lots of attacks on our grid. They could shut down or cause an accident at, but definitely shut down nuclear power plants. They could shut down just conventional energy plants. Why aren't we just going to microgrids? Like this hospital, is it just too expensive? Do we need to be on a big grid to cover each other when things go down? Caprice, what's your thinking on that?
It's about upgrading with technology, and the technology is there now. And it's also changing the way our relationship with corporations. So at this time, you have major utility corporation controlling, and microgrids are actually more independently run.
Well, like we're putting solar on our house, but we have to send that energy to the grid, and they send back. We have to pay them for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so it's a different way of living, and taking power away from some corporations and allowing for greater flexibility, greater independence. And New York also, when it had the major floods, independent people were going around creating microgrids, electricity as well as internet.
Well,
And
that's an interesting idea too.
yeah, and so I think it's a different way of living, that it's time that we start adopting technology that already exists so that we can actually coexist in a better way with planet Earth.
What do you? I saw a little furrow brow there, John. You're not seeing the exact same way.
Well, I think we're moving in that direction, but it's the economics, right?
Right. It costs a lot of money to do a zillion microgrids.
To upgrade.
Although we
Caprice was
lose a
saying.
lot of money sending electricity over distance
Sure,
too.
sure, but my concern is that you don't recreate the same problem, right? That you
Mhm.
have a kind of internet dependent microgrid because all this stuff, everyone wants to use it and operate it, maintain it remotely.
Is what you're doing at the hospital internet dependent?
I don't know those details, Paul, so
Okay.
I can't answer that, but I suspect it probably will not. I mean
Right.
that the quote
It
unquote
makes sense not to when you get a storm.
right?
Mhm.
That it's going to be locally controlled in the hospital, but I don't know that for a
Why a
fact.
hospital? What role do hospitals play during disasters? That's kind of obvious. They keep people alive, but how have they not been able to because power goes out?
Well,
We're reading about that in Florida now.
Right.
Heart-wrenching stories where people are
Some-
standing at the front door of the
some of
hospital
the
say,
First
bleeding.
people who came here to Connecticut, they had critical health issues. And if they didn't have electricity, their lives were seriously at risk. And so those who are in a very delicate health situations, their lives could be lost in a matter of less than a day if certain things fail.
So what's the date and time of this lawn club event?
it's November 15th and begins at 5:30. That's on a Thursday at the Lawn Club.
And as we continue talking, I just want to say something very important, and I'm going to embarrass you for a second, John Padilla, which is many years ago, you and your wife, Frances Padilla, had a vision and a dream.
I was going to get to that.
Oh,
That's
well,
fine. Let's go to it.
great.
Progreso
And
Latino Fund.
Yeah,
Why are you the group that's been so much at the forefront of this? Why are you especially positioned in New Haven to take this on? So you're talking about how 15 years ago, John and Francis Padilla started the Progreso Latino Fund in New Haven.
and they convinced friends and others to come in and put together their money to have greater impact for the common good. And I grew up in New Haven, and the issues that Latinos have faced are not even talked about enough. There is a lot of inequity and disparities, but I think PLF for me on a personal level, coming back home, it didn't exist when I was growing up, but coming back home and as an adult and being part of it has been really an honor to see the impact that two people who planted a dream and a vision and those seeds have flourished. And now to be able to provide life-saving technology to a hospital with the help of the larger community, that's like a dream come true, where I was born in Guatemala but raised in New Haven since the age of 5, turning 6. And I've always dreamt of, we can't forget the people back home. So seeing this happen for Puerto Rico is really such a beautiful dream to see taking
Now,
place.
let's talk about those two dreams. I also want to talk about Caprice, how she grew up here and came back, and what she's been up to. And we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven and WNHH, your home for community radio, 103.5 FM, live stream at newhavenprint.org. Our guests today are Caprice Taylor Mendez and John Padilla from the Progreso Latino Fund, among many other organizations in town. They have a big event coming up November 15th to help raise money and consciousness in the wake a year after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. But as Caprice mentioned, John, you and Francis, two bulwarks of our community, two people who really do a lot of great volunteer and everyday work in our community. You started the Progressive Latino Fund 15 years ago. Why did you start it? How did you start it?
So the idea basically is one that comes from this conviction Francis and I had that, you know, our community was coming a long way. We had a lot of folks in this community who were successful but were invisible. And you know, Francis and I both grew up in New York City. We are both products of Aspira, which was a youth development program for Puerto Rican kids back in the 70s in New York. And that whole experience, you know, as I often say, shaped who we were as adolescents and shaped who we became as adults. And part of that experience was really about, you know, giving back to community, you know, giving a hand up, not a hand out. And, you know, remembering, at least I try to remember every day that, you know, I got to where I am by three things. You know, it was hard work, it was help from other people, and a little bit of luck.
So what was your position in New Haven? Francis right now runs the Universal Community Healthcare Foundation.
I was at the time, I was what I still am today. I'm a self-employed consultant. I had just come off the board of the Community Foundation. I served for 7 years on the board, the last 2 as chair. And I knew that the foundation had an interest in doing this, but really didn't have a good idea how to do it. But for us, it was you know, PLF was a way of
Progressive Latino Fund.
Right. PLF, the Progressive Latino Fund, was a way of harnessing energy and resources into one place that could be used for the greater good. And we had friends who grew up like us, who had similar values as us, and we knew that if we approached them, they would join us. So we approached the foundation that had been trying to create a fund, and we said, we'll deliver a fund, and this is what we want in return. And we needed staff support because all of us had day jobs, right? So we needed staff support. We went and spoke to 10 of our friends, and we asked each of them for $1,000. Explained to them that we wanted to create this fund that would basically support the Latino community and raise issues of importance to Latinos and basically promote the social economic benefit of the Latino community. And we wanted to create this fund to do that, and we asked each of them for $1,000. Every one of them said yes.
How many?
$1,000.
What? No, how many people?
10.
Okay, so you started with $10,000.
We started with 15,
okay.
Actually. Francis and I made the initial gift, and then we got people to join. And from there, you know, the more we spoke to people, the idea caught on. And people liked the idea that the fund was going to the community foundation, that there was going to be a longevity to this fund, that, you know, we weren't raising this money and then giving it all away, and then, you know, you're back at square one having to raise more money.
So how much do you distribute a year?
Right now, we distribute about 25,000.
Really? So how big is the fund?
Now it's about 400,000.
Whoa!
Yeah.
So you built that thing up.
It's yeah. We had
way to go.
And
they're getting good returns at the foundation. I know that
we get excellent returns.
They're like the Swenson thing.
Yeah, we get excellent returns.
Yeah, because that's at over a 5% return.
Right.
Most people, when you think about investing your money, is that because partly they can invest it with the other hundreds of millions they have?
Well, yes.
So you can get a higher return by investing more money.
And obviously, when you're investing millions of dollars, you're talking about very sophisticated investment strategy, right? That we
right. Drew Alden, I know he's kind of a guru there at the foundation.
Yeah, we benefit from that stuff. So
that's good that you're able to get that kind of return on 400K.
Yeah, of the 400,000, about 310,000 has been actually contributed. Right now, remember, this is this growth over the last 15 years includes the Great Recession. When the fund.
So what was what's the other 90?
That's growth. That's interest, right?
Oh wow!
That's financial.
So you clear some at the end. I mean, in addition to giving away more than 5% of the money, you earn enough to squirrel some away.
The way it works with an endowment, Paul, is that you give away a set amount every year. So, for instance, let's say right now, the fund is 400,000. 5% of that would roughly be about $20,000. Let's say that the fund earns, in 2018, it earned $38,000.
That's what I mean. Most people aren't earning 5% of their money.
Right. 18,000 stays in the fund. We give away the 20.
Well, that's awesome. 5%. So what kind of stuff do you give money to?
Well, over the 15 years, the impact has been great. In the last year, for example, there was support for the Puerto Rican families relocating to New Haven. There was also support for a beautiful academic program supporting immigrant children, primarily Latino and from Africa. And these children are chosen into the program because of their interest in soccer. And through that, they're learning academics, and all end up going to college, to private mid-sized universities, getting their college education, and coming back even and supporting the younger ones. It's such a beautiful model. PLF supported that work. In addition, we had a unique opportunity in the state of Connecticut to receive national funds in support of immigrant rights, in support of immigrants going through pathway to changing their status if they were eligible, trying to keep families together, fighting against deportation. PLF provided matching funds that allowed for the state to anchor those dollars here locally. So the money that PLF invested, the money that PLF donors invested, equaled up to $100,000 is what we were able to get in that match.
Awesome.
So the way that PLF, the actual impact amplifies, where collectively those dollars make greater impact than if an individual went ahead and said, okay, I'm going to donate $50 to my favorite nonprofit at this time.
And Caprice, what's your job? What's your role? Not job, because you work at Community Foundation. What's your role at Progressive Latino Fund, PLF?
Yes, I staff and I get to write up the minutes.
So you kind of help make that happen with that match for the families.
Yes.
You can go to bed at night feeling pretty good about that, huh?
Yes. So I was part of the national proposal writing up that proposal, and having PLF partnering with us was such a blessing.
So I'd be interested in both of your Oh, John, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to underestimate the value of having the foundation support in what PLF does. I mean, without
you get Caprice,
without the support of Caprice and the other staff,
and
we'd never be able to do this, right? All of us have day jobs, we have ideas, but the staff, makes it happen.
So let me ask you two both for perspective here. So, John, did your family originally come from Puerto Rico?
Yes.
And I hadn't realized, Caprice, that you're from Guatemala. I thought you, for some reason, they're Puerto Rico, but I'll tell you why in a second. So you grew up, Caprice, if I remember correctly, your father, Frank Taylor, was the head of Junta, major Latino agency in town.
Correct.
It's had a second life now under, a different generation.
Correct.
And, John, you've been active in New Haven. So you knew as a kid, not a red diaper baby, you were a Latino community diaper baby.
Yes.
And, John, you grew up very much at the forefront of Latino activism in town. And tell me if I have this right. So when I think back, not really 15 years, but more like 30 years, the biggest numbers in the Latino community and the involved community trace their heritage to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Even though your family and Frank were from Guatemala. And now in the second generation of Junta, now in the rise of the Progreso Latino Fund, even a lot of those same people are involved, the Latino makeup of the city has drastically evolved to include immigrants from Latin America. Have you seen that shift, and how has that changed or evolve the Latino community as a force?
Just go down Grand Avenue.
Right.
Go down Grand Avenue. Look who's there. Mexican store, South American store. Peruvian restaurants, Peruvian
and Colombian,
delis, Colombian. So the diversity of who's here has grown exponentially. Now, that's been driven largely by economic, right? Because of the economic problems in Latin America, as well as war, right? People are fleeing violence. So
what does that mean for New Haven? Like, doesn't there need to be a broadening of leadership? Like, I'm even just looking at Lavos over the years. I've seen it. Now, almost everybody comes from a different country.
Mm-hmm.
And Norma, who runs it, was from the United States always, Puerto Rico and then New Haven. And has that kind of happened similarly in other institutions? Do you find that has been seamless? Did it require some pushing at some point?
Speaking directly to Progreso Latino Fund, John Padilla and other leaders have actually said we need to diversify who's on the advisory committee itself. And so we do have a good representation from different countries in the advisory committee. So I think it's important to have that diversity, but it also has a challenge, that new diversity in New Haven. Coming from Guatemala, my dad being very active in the Latino community, I identified as Guatemalan and as Latina, and actually as Afro-Latina, because my dad was Black Guatemalan. And many, though, immigrants, recent immigrants, they first identify still with their home country. And we still need to educate and inform ourselves and each other how this system here works. And there is racism in the system. There is inequity. There is discrimination. And if you're not aware of how your own ethnic identity plays into it, we could actually disempower ourselves. Meaning, if we do not operate as a collective, where Latino does not exist as an identity in Latin America.
That's true
it's
for
a
every
US
group.
based.
I mean, it's every group plays the African Americans, you have Afro-Caribbean.
Exactly.
Jewish people have like different denominations or countries they come from. John, you know, you talked about wanting to broaden your board. That sounds to me like an example of someone saying we have to open the door to make sure we're not just running it as a small group.
Yeah, and you know, the question you asked initially, Paul, about the political,
Yeah, and I'm obviously going to get into that.
Of aspects of this. I think it's a process, right? You know, that Puerto Ricans, largely because we're citizens and because there was planned migration of Puerto Ricans to, the Northeast to fill factories. We came here earlier. We established ourselves. And, up until the Cuban migration in the early 60s, there really was not another Latino migration, because Mexicans were already here. Right. All right. So Mexicans in the Southwest California, they were here already.
Now we've gotten this explosion of Mexican population more recently.
That's right. So then, you get into the 70s, you get the Latin American, Central American populations coming. And over time, if you look at New York now, right? New York, for years, Puerto Ricans were the principal Latino politicians. Today, you have Dominicans, you have Mexicans, you have Puerto Ricans, you have Cubans. Right, so it's taken a while. I think people kind of eventually build the critical mass that they need to not just run for office but get elected, right? And you're going to see the same thing in Connecticut. You have a pretty substantial Latino Colombian population. You have a pretty substantial Mexican population. I would not doubt within the next, no more than 3 election cycles, you're going to see a Colombian or Mexican running for state rep. And
then statewide, we were talking about this before we went on the air. So I wonder if politics is the last redoubt, because I look at Progressive Latino Fund. We've already heard on the show how you have melded both, not more than 2. You've really multiple agendas, getting everybody in. Caprice talked about how they're getting national money, that you're helping to help immigrants, and you're also helping, from a lot of countries, and you're also at the forefront here of what happened with Puerto Rico. You're not forgetting your roots there. Look here at Lavosa, that's broadened. But, I look at politics, and, first of all, the majority of the city's public school students are now Latino in New Haven.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of feeling among Latinos who are active in town that there isn't a lot of representation in the upper ranks of the schools, or a lot of attention, or as much as they felt being paid to the needs of that constituency. And maybe it's not one constituency, although on some issues it's similar. I'm looking at politics. Ava Bermudez Zimmerman, you had this very strong candidate. You've never had anyone on a state ticket for who's been Latino or Latina. This time you had a very strong candidate for lieutenant governor. She won New Haven. She did not get the nomination. But here's what surprised me on election day as an outsider looking at this. You had this strong Latino candidate, and there was a lot of excitement about her in New Haven. And in wards that are not Latinos, she won by big margins. She won big in Westville. She won big in East Rock. Almost nobody showed up in Latino neighborhoods. I went with a lot of active Latino people in politics to Ward 15 polling place, Martinez School in Fairhaven, high concentration of Latino and immigrant population. There were effectively 0 votes for her in that ward. I mean, there were 60 all day for Ava. That's as much as in an hour in other parts. Why is that happening? Is it just that with an immigrant population, it takes longer to assimilate into the political process? or is it that politics is changing and it's a lot about money and individual candidates rather than group identity? What do you see as the challenge there?
Paul, we can speculate. I mean, from here until 5 o'clock in the evening as to the whys. But I'll say this about Eva's candidacy, which I think is, for me, are the important things. One, she was a credible candidate, right?
Yeah, she's
very
strong.
important. We have not had many, as Latinos, have not had many credible statewide candidates.
We had Tomas Reyes run for mayor years back when he was qualified.
But I'm talking statewide, right?
Okay.
Because statewide means you have to have a broad constituency, right? Statewide means your appeal goes beyond a couple of blocks in the ward, right? Statewide means you have to be able to raise money, right? Eva could do all that, right? So she's the first candidate we've had in a long time who had that kind of.
Right, she had trade union backing.
That's right. She had that too.
And also African Americans. She built bridges within cities. Yep.
Secondly, she showed she was able to raise money, right? Which again, in today's political world, if you cannot raise money, you're not going far. That's just the reality. And as a community, we aren't there yet where we support our candidates politically, with money. Because at the end of the day, people need money to run political campaigns. And we still, I think, have some work to do in our community, that when we have people that are running for office that stand a good chance of getting elected, that we have to go into our pockets, deep into our pockets, and help them.
All right. So, and again, I don't mean to dump at me or criticize, because I think that's true with any emerging majority, especially coming from another country. I mean, the Jews didn't all vote when we weren't legal here in New York in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. We came in. It takes time. Yeah. But I do think that's a real challenge. And I wonder if there's also a challenge of uniting different groups from different areas.
And so the Community Foundation, we have an initiative that was new called Greater New Haven Votes, and it was meant specifically to address historical disenfranchisement. There's a history behind why certain people do not vote as well. And there has to be a concerted effort to break down the effects of that history as to why certain populations do not go out and vote. And some of it even comes down as simple as to access to information. How are people getting information in a timely fashion to make choices and having real choices where candidates speak to them? And I think my own personal opinion with Ms. Bermudez is it was such a short span of time for people to learn about her, get excited, and get activated, where you've never had that before.
So maybe the story is a positive story. She ran a short period of time, and to be fair, and I disagreed very much with the other side of a discussion John was having with someone before the show. I believe that no longer party machines deliver. In most cases, there are exceptions. It's really, you have to go out and get it. So, in fact, Ava did very well in a short time, especially with non-Latino voters.
Yes.
And so maybe this, and I feel she had a very strong opponent in Susan Bysowitz, not in cities, but Bysowitz works so hard at the town level. She doesn't, even though she got that, she made a deal to get on that ticket, she really goes town to town and that kind of stuff. But I'm going to station ID and then get back. I want to continue on this voting registration issue. You're talking to John Padilla and Caprice Taylor Mendez, two of the leaders in the Latino community in building consciousness, money for projects, and unity. And they're from the Progreso Latino Fund here on Dateline New Haven and WNHH FM. So voting. Caprice, you and Kenneth Revez, right? They're all different Fairhaven. You've been working a lot on this.
Yes.
You've been trying to make sure people get registered. You did a great job with the forum you did for the governor campaign. Got a big crowd, a lot of good issues brought to the forefront. You got community groups involved. You're sending people out, is it every weekend to register voters?
Not every weekend, but through our nonprofit partners that we could not do this without, they've been registering voters on a daily basis.
And what is the group called, the effort, the campaign?
Greater New Haven Vote.
Greater New Haven. And now, so what have you done so far besides that great forum? How many people have you registered?
We got on a call yesterday, probably, 300, 400.
Excellent. Where?
Throughout the city, including Fairhaven.
Oh, okay.
New Hallville, Dixwell. Through the efforts, we've also captured some people from Bridgeport.
It does seem like this is the ground level for the political part. Like there are other efforts that don't have to do with electoral politics, like what Progressive Latino Fund does. But if I'm not mistaken, part of what you're doing, in addition to getting those people signed up, You
Mhm.
also want them to become political actors once they
Yes.
signed up. So you're doing a lot of consciousness raising about the importance of voting.
Yes, and they're taking a pledge. So they sign a pledge card, and anyone can take that pledge online at the Community Foundation's website under Greater New Haven Vote. And with that pledge, it gives Greater New Haven Vote permission to stay in touch with individuals text-to-text service. We could actually send you a text and say, this is an issue of importance that you mentioned. You wanted to know what's happening at the State House. And if you want to take an action, this is the action that you can take. And there were 5 issue areas identified by our nonprofit partners, being affordable housing, criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, and immigration. And if you take the pledge, identify one or all of those issues, our nonprofit groups would keep you informed beyond just the November 6th election. And the conversations with people, that one-to-one dialogue, that trusting relationship that nonprofits have with people in communities is what's making the difference when these are new voters that never voted before.
Way to go. And I also heard, tell me if this is true, it might have just been a rumor, that if they don't end up voting, they either get a knock on the door or a pop-up of Caprice on their phone saying, you got another hour, get down there, we know you haven't voted yet. John, what about your experience? What have you seen over the years in New Haven about the electoral politics versus other forms of organizing and what makes the difference?
You know, the work that Caprice is leading right now is so important because it
gets to the root.
Yeah, the issue is always about whether or not people show up. You know, we do voter registration campaigns all the time. Quite frankly, I'm tired of seeing voter registration campaigns, but people don't go, right? And if you don't vote, then it's all been a waste of time.
And there's one group in town that gets people to vote, and it's great they do that. Unite Here is the Yale Unions. They build a bigger coalition. They get, when they want something happens, because they get them out to vote. Right. And whenever people have criticized them, Tony Harp said this best, even though they were against her in this thing, said, don't criticize them for doing that. More people need to go out and get people registered and voting so everyone can be represented.
I mean, what they're doing is not a mystery. They register people. They get
talk
them.
The issues. As
they get, you know, if they have to take them, they get them to the polls to vote. You know, this is not a mystery.
And we're offering November 6 rides so that not having a ride is not an excuse.
Yeah, Paul, you know, the issue of Latinos in voting, right? So PLF uses these forums as a way to engage people. And the Progreso Latino Forum happens once or twice a year. And our formula on this has been pretty consistent since we started. We try to bring a national perspective, a state perspective, and a local perspective to whatever the topic is. A few years ago, we did a forum on why Latinos don't vote. And it was really interesting, right? The folks that we had someone from the National Council of La Raza who was their electoral expert. We had Americo Santiago at the time was doing work in the Secretary of State's office, and we had someone.
He was a state rep, wasn't he, from Bridgeport?
He was a state rep, but this is after his state rep days. But you know, among the factors, right, that people pointed to over and over is this notion that my vote doesn't count. My vote is not going to make a difference, so people just don't care. So that's that apathy is our biggest problem. We need to educate people on why it matters. It's not just whether or not your candidate voted, but what happens with the census, what happens with redistricting, what happens with the way federal money is reapportioned, right? You know, people don't know that. Now in Puerto Rico they do because it's very local, right? So people vote. You know, you hear about elections in Puerto Rico that have 90% plus.
Wow.
You know, electoral participation rates. But there's some simple reasons for that. One of them is that oftentimes people's employment is tied to whether or not their party wins.
That's interesting. So let me ask you too, in the few minutes we have left, what else you've been up to in New Haven these days? You guys are so busy. You've already talked about a lot. What other kind of community work are you doing, Caprice?
Well, I do want to add to what John said, which is really important. If our votes didn't count, why do legislators across the country take the time to pass laws, which we know it's hard to do, to take away voting power from certain populations? If it didn't matter, why do people go through that effort to take away voting power? So I'll leave it at that.
Exhibit A, Georgia. Yeah. So what else are you up to these days?
We're also working around the immigration side of things. We were fortunate to receive another national set of dollars. And again, the PLF matching funds just keep working. And an additional $50,000. And we're hoping that we can continue supporting the great work happening, including what I call like the last saving grace, where our families, when they get held by ICE, we do not have a local detention center in Connecticut. They get sent immediately out of state, including Massachusetts and worse, Texas, making it difficult to get access to legal representation. And New Haven Legal Assistance is one of our key partners. They've committed to screening people in partnership with some organizations in Massachusetts to see if they can qualify for asylum and being able to stay here in this country, and to slow down the deportation process to give enough time to fight their case. So I call it like the last saving grace. Our funds are going to support that type of work as well. I also get to work with amazing other nonprofits through our reentry program. That's
people coming out of prison.
People, yes, and returning here. And we have partners that I'm proud to say are our partners, including the Warren Kimbrough Initiative with Earl Bloodsworth in the city of New Haven, doing amazing work. And a lot of people do not know how fragile the reentry system is in New Haven. We have only one staffer who has the flexibility in the city, in the entire city, the flexibility to meet people right when they're released out of prison in New Haven, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. He's the one that gets the call. They're out there.
Who's that?
Oh my gosh, Smalls.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can't remember.
He goes out 3 or 4 in the morning?
He goes out 3 or 4 in the morning, and he has a cell phone. And the men who come out or women who come out, they call him when they're like, life is tough out here. I can't find a job. I'm about to do something stupid because I can't survive out here. He's the one that they call anytime in the day, and he talks them down, and he gives them hope. He holds weekly support groups, piecing together funds for meals for the people who are trying to change their lives around, but it's tough out there, and our reentry system is very fragile. We're also proud supporter of Emerge that John is part of.
They do a great job taking people coming out of prison, training them for jobs, getting them internships. John, before we get out, let me just ask, because you're up to York, do so many things at a time in New Haven every time I come across you. You got your hands full here with Progreso Latino Fund, big event coming up.
Yeah. I mean, PLF takes up a lot of my... PLF takes up a lot of my time right now locally, because we're at a point where we really want to grow the fund, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Aside from that, I'm involved with the Connecticut Mirror on their board of directors.
How's that going?
Good. It's incredibly interesting. We're in the process of doing a strategic plan and really thinking about the future and what that model looks like for online journalism, which is something that I'm sure you think about as well.
Every day. All day.
So that's good. And then beyond
I think the model's going to paywalls.
Well,
not necessarily in New Haven, but it's the economics is starting to work.
Yeah. So
readers supported.
Let's talk in a couple of months when we have a plan.
Okay.
And then the other thing is just my consulting work, which I'm blessed to work with some really interesting and fine people around the country that are doing things to move their community forward, and I get to play a role in that.
And Eric Ray says, hi, John Padilla. Thanks for listening, Eric, and thanks to the hosts for listening. We're going to take it out now, but I just want to remind people that Progreso Latino Fund is holding a great event, a forum on November 15th. That's a Thursday, 5:30 at the Lawn Club. And first, you'd learn a lot. There's a mayor coming from Puerto Rico and the president of Puerto Rican Community Foundation talking about efforts to rebuild the island a year after Maria, but also very specifically trying to raise money to match the $15,000 that the Progreso Latino Fund has raised for microgrid at a hospital. Let's see if I get this right, John. Naranjito?
Yes.
City in Puerto Rico, because they want to make sure that next time bad weather comes, because bad weather's coming everywhere, folks, that the hospitals will have energy and can keep people alive. Well, thank you so much for what you do, Caprice Taylor Mendez and John Padilla. Thank you for coming on today to Dateline New Haven. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.